Machariel used to be the largest Angel ship, and it also used to be the flagship of the Angel fleet. But in the recent big update we have received the faction carriers, and now the largest Angel ship is the Angel carrier. And in a moment I will show you how that ship looks, and I also plan to show you how those new faction carriers work, and I will probably start with the Blood Raider one. Now here is the Vazago. The name Vazago basically means fallen angel, so that's a very nice touch in the way how the ship is named. The ship looks very nice. The hull of the Vazago is a little bit changed from the ordinary Mimater carrier, and honestly the angel pattern looks awesome on this monster. Cannot wait to actually show you how these new ships work. Okay, well, let's not look at the trait description of the carrier, but let's take a look at the trait description of the Machariel. Now, I've had this ship for like 3 years, and I've already had maximum skills for a very long time. The roll bonus is basically standard for all angel ships. They're pretty fast, excellent warp acceleration, and very nice damage control stats. Now the Machariel gets a bonus on large cannon damage and large cannon accuracy, as well as large cannon tracking. So the Machariel will have excellent DPS as well as excellent range, which makes this ship very nice for basically PvP, PvE, or any other content that you like to do with this monster. The Machariel can be both a shield or armor tank. That depends entirely up to your skills. In my case, the Machariel is a passive shield tank or an active shield tank when I run missions. Now, one thing where the Machariel does kind of lack is the capacitor. The capacitor in the Machariel is not the best, so that's one thing to keep in mind. And while the rest of the stats are okay, the Machariel is, like I mentioned before, really fast. Although not the fastest faction battleship, it's the second fastest faction battleship. The fastest one is the Nestor, which can hit over 3 kilometers per second. Now this is my build that I use for high sec missions. It has about 3,600 DPS. Now I actually used to have tier 4 rigs on this ship, but due to a bug the rigs did vanish, and after contacting customer support I got the rigs back, but I haven't put the rigs back in the ship since. I used the normal tier 3 rigs, and I will probably keep those rigs for a very long time. Now the PvP build that I usually run on the Machariel has quad gyro stabilizers, 1 damage control, and it has 1 afterburner or a micro updrive, although I personally prefer a micro updrive because the ship is, after all, very fast, and it's excellent for hit and run operations. 3 webs and 1 scrammer, or 3 scrammers and 1 web, depends on the situation and of course depends on the target. And this is how this ship looks when I have the gyro stabilizers equipped. And here are the rigs. Triple cannon burst, tier 3, and I used to have tier 4 warp core optimizers, although that's changed into tracking system subcontrollers, basically faster locking on, mostly because I personally didn't have the need to put the warp core optimizers back, never had to use them, probably never will have to use them, and I already like to run this ship with a cloaking device, so having the extra track computers help to compensate if I decide to run the ship as a Black Ops Machariel, which honestly and surprisingly it works really well. Now 4,300 with 1 gyro stabilizer. With the second gyro stabilizer active it's 5,000, almost 5,100 DPS. With the third one it's 5,600, and with the fourth one the DPS is 5,800, almost 6,000 DPS, which honestly is nice, it's okay. With the Barrage Implant this goes over 10,000, over 15,000, but I don't use the Barrage Implant that often anymore, so it's not really that important, but the Barrage Implant does increase the DPS a lot. But lately I did stop using it, and most of the time I actually run the Thermal Circulation Implant for extra tank. And of course, with the damage control, you get about 18 seconds of very high resistances, which is good if you have to escape or if you have to withstand a certain amount of damage. Now, the second build that I personally really like is the build with a cloaking device. Yes, I know, a cloaking device on a Machariel. What can go wrong? Well, I've been using this as my main build for a while, and honestly, it's ridiculous how well it works. I mean, not many players expect a Machariel to cloak. Really good when you kill a target and then you have to wait out the timer in space. Instead of being on your toes during the whole 10 minutes, you can simply cloak and just relax until the timer is out and then warp away or dock in the station. Depends on the location, I guess, but a cloaking device works really well on this Machariel. And this remains one of my weirdest and craziest builds that I did come up with. And this is usually the setup with the modules that I run. The autocannon is separated in 2 groups, 2x4 groups, and the cloaking device is on the second page. And well, you can cloak and the ship can still glide for some time before it hits full stop. The drawback is that your targeting speed will be bad, so you will have to use targeting computers, targeting rigs, and the other drawback is 30 seconds lock-on delay when you decloak. But besides that, excellent when you have to wait for the criminal timer to go out. And well, I've been using this for a very long time now. So haven't lost the Machariel yet. This is still the Machariel that I did get some 3 years ago. At this moment it's actually 3 years ago. And yeah, a lot of history is written on this ship. This ship has been through a couple of coalitions, this ship has been through a lot of systems, and this ship also has destroyed a lot of ships. And this Machariel has the 2 space span kills, which is also very nice. Now a more normal build is this build with adaptive shield harness, 1 capacitor battery, shield booster, damage control, and a micro drive. However, this is where the capacitor issues start to be apparent, and even with 1 booster the capacitor doesn't last over 4 minutes. However, with smart capacitor usage, with different rigs, and with, let's say, different general units, you can make the capacitor on this thing last a very good amount of time. Now, if I go with an active tank, then it's a very nice idea to go and use an afterburn. Now the capacitor is almost 6 minutes, which is honestly pretty nice time. I would be able to increase that a lot if I were to use the Nosferatu unit and if I were to change the rigs a little bit, but this Machariel is after all a DPS ship, so I will keep on using DPS rigs. But if you want to create a tanky Machariel, it is very easy to do so. Very easy to do with the normal rigs, also very easy to do with rig integrations, depends on what kind of build you need. In my case, I like to have high DPS on the ship, and the Machariel remains one of the only ships, one of the only battleships that I still run with DPS only. I don't really run the Machariel as a tank most of the time. And with the damage control, the hit points go up to 649,000, 88, 89, 92 and 93% resistance, which is okay for a DPS focused ship.
Docking request accepted.
Okay, now let me show you the next build that I have in mind. Now, I usually like to keep the damage control on ships that have a damage control bonus, but you can easily replace the damage control with another module. Sometimes it's smarter to have a reactive or another adaptive than to have a damage control, but the damage control is actually very useful. and very useful to counter some implants, very useful to counter multiple ships or to counter high DPS. Every second is very important. Now with a build with dual boosters, the capacitor will take a massive hit, so dual Nosferatus, dual boosters and a capacitor battery will be recommended, and a build like this works really well if your rigs are also focused on tank. And you can replace the battery with a damage control, but this will reduce the capacitor runtime by 1 whole minute. And you can also use the reactive hardeners. They are good against lasers, against railguns, against drones, against single or dual weapon damage types. And over here you can also use a damage control, which should give you some pretty good resistance values. Again, you would get some really nice tank out of this ship with a build like this if you have the tank rigs. And honestly, in some cases, having the better tank is the
Undocking.
way to go. It really depends on the moment, on the situation. Cannot really be prepared for every possible scenario. So it's very important to know what your ship can do and what your ship can't do. That way you can ensure that your ship will stay alive as long as possible. Now let's take a look at the active stats with this build. 245,000, 71, 74, 81 and 84% resistance. 9 minutes is the capacitor runtime, which is really good. But only 1 shield booster, and that can easily be... the tank can easily be broken, so if you want to maximize the tank, again, the tank rigs or integrations are going to be very, very useful on this ship. And now with the damage control active, the stats should go up drastically. 725,000 hit points, which is nice. 90, 91, 93 and 95% resistance, which is good for critical moments. Again, every single second is going to matter, and the damage control is
Docking
one very
request
useful module.
accepted.
Now, one of the PvP builds that I like to use that involves a full tank build on the Machariel is this one. Now this is not a active tank, this is a passive shield tank, and I thought for a very long time to change the rigs into tank rigs just for this build to see how it works, but I believe that the current stats
Undocking.
are already pretty nice. I also thought to go and use one combat rig for a defensive rig integration just to maximize the resistances, and I think that might actually work. However, I will sacrifice a little bit of DPS, but I should get about 90-91% resistance without the damage control, and still should push about 4.5 to 5,000 DPS with the Barrage Implant active, or about 2.3 or 2.1 thousand DPS without the Barrage Implant active, which is still, I would say, impressive DPS. And these are the stats on the Machariel. 1.2 kilometers per second is the micro updrive speed, although this is not a C-type and definitely not built for maximum speed in this case, but the Machariel can reach about 2 kilometers per second very easily. 834,000 hit points is with the damage control active, which honestly is pretty good, and I'm quite satisfied with this build. Now, with this build, in order to counter smaller ships like cruisers, frigates, destroyers, you can use neutralizers, 1 or 2 energy neutralizers, large ones, and that way you can still maintain 1 scrambler and 1 web. However, in low sec I would use triple scramblers and a cloaking device, because that's the safest way how to operate a battleship in low sec, where there is a lot of stab ships. Now, an armor tank Machariel is actually really good now, because you can increase your passive stats with the thermal circulation implant. Now, an armor tank Machariel requires good armor tank rigs and probably integrations, because the armor repairs have a very long cycle time. With the implant you can easily fix that, and the capacitor will last a little bit longer because the armor repairs are actually very easy on the capacitor.
Undocking.
So let's undock and let me show you the active stats. Now I have the thermal circulation implant active, so the cold armor resistances will be up by 20%, and with a very good armor rig setup you can get some really scary stats on the Machariel. Of course that will sacrifice the DPS, but you can create a very tanky ship. And again, in some cases the tank is actually a lot better than the DPS. It really is situational, but from my personal experience, most of my ships that are built on DPS did die at one point, but most of my ships that are built as tanks, they are still alive. Now, I personally would prefer to keep the dual armor repairs. That works really well if you have the rigs and the general units for them. But of course we can also run dual adaptives and one reactive hardener. The damage control can be there, but at the same time you can also replace the damage control with something else. Depends on your personal fitting preference. Like I mentioned before, I like to keep the damage control because it can be helpful in critical moments. And I already did, the damage control did kind of save my ship a couple times when I fought other Machariels that had the Barrage implant. Very nice to counter a lot of the nasty implants that are flying around. And again, some decent stats with the hardeners, and now with the damage control active. 726,000 hit points, 94, 95, 93, 92 and 90% resistance, which is really good. I'm very happy with the results on the Machariel. Now the armor tank Machariel is actually a really good and a really solid choice. I did see a lot of them lately. However, none of them did use a good build, unfortunately, so the armor tank on their ship did not hold very well. But with a thermal implant and with some good rigs, you can create something very, very tanky and could be a good counter to the ApocStriker. Now, speaking of the ApocStriker, that is basically, the Apocalypse is basically the player's favorite for PvE. It is currently the most used ship in PvE. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that other ships are useless for PvE missions. The Machariel is one faction battleship that does clear missions very well. Now, the problem with the Machariel is that you have to be active, you have to basically actively play the game, while the Apocalypse can easily AFK stuff, or be semi-AFK and basically just snipe targets. However, with the Machariel, if you go with a sniper build and if you use the large artillery, they have a very long cycle time, they have very high alpha damage, but they will clear the missions slower than, let's say, beam lasers and ships that use overall different weapon systems. So in order to maximize the speed to clear the mission, I did go with autocannons, and this is basically the build that I show you on the start of the video. This is my choice for a PvE ship, although I don't really do PvE, but sometimes when I have to develop a build, I go and do a couple missions just to get inspiration for a build, and then I go and actually build the ship. But this is one build that I use for missions, and my PvE as well as PvP ship is the Machariel. My ApocStriker did not do a lot of missions, and I don't really do missions with the Apocalypse. Now, it's not because of the nerf, not because I don't like the Apocalypse. I actually love that ship. It's a very good ship. It's actually very amazing, but I just find it a bit more, let's say, satisfying to watch the autocannons with the new effects, and it all feels, I don't know, more satisfying to blow up ships with the autocannons. There is a certain feel on the ship that doesn't exist on the Apocalypse. So one good alternative to the ApocStriker is the Machariel. However, the other faction battleships are also a very nice and a very valid choice. The Vindicator can also be extremely good for missions because of the web bonus. You can run 1 or 2 webs and you don't have to worry about fast ships. It also has fantastic DPS with the blasters, however it has very short range, so the range might be one issue on the Vindicator, but the Machariel has about... It does hit targets up to 60 kilometers. Optimal range is about 35 kilometers. I mean, optimal range is about 5 kilometers. Accuracy fell off at 35, so you have a pretty good... You have pretty good range with the autocannons, and the Machariel has a bonus on range and tracking, so it doesn't have much of a problem at dealing with the smaller targets. That also includes the fact that the Machariel is one of the more difficult targets to tackle in LoSec because of the range and tracking that the ship has. They're very effective, let's say the least, at shooting down Orotos cruisers. They're very good at shooting down ships with micro drives. So if you plan to engage one Machariel in LoSec, be very careful. A lot of them do run tracking computers, and if the Machariel has a tracking computer, no matter how fast you're orbiting, if you're a kite cruiser, then the Machariel will hit you, and don't forget, the Machariel has some pretty terrifying DPS, so if it starts hitting you, you better be prepared to warp, because if you don't, the Machariel will eat your cruiser alive. And I'm talking from my personal experience here. I've tackled thousands of ships, and there are a couple ships that you have to be really careful around, and the Machariel is one of those ships, because, well, it's pretty good with the autocannons, and its tracking allows it to basically hit anything that's orbiting it, including small frigates. Now, even at close range, the Machariel can easily hit you, because most of them run triple or quad webs nowadays. And yeah, if the Machariel webs you, and if the Machariel does not like your ship, well, the Machariel will pop your ship. So always be very careful around these monsters. They are really scary ships. Same goes to the ApocStriker. Although, if the ApocStriker is running beam lasers, then it's not much of a threat. However, a ApocStriker with beam lasers is still a bigger threat than the Machariel with the large artillery, because the beam lasers can still hit you if you are triple webbed at close range, but the large artillery can't hit you at close range. So if you have to fight a sniper Machariel, then make sure that you orbit at 0. That way, no matter what they do, they will never hit your ship. These are just some of the tricks that you can use with the Machariel or against the Machariel. Depends on the situation that you're at. And lately, I've seen a lot of Machariels. I have destroyed like 15 or 20 of Machariels in the last 3 days or something like that. My combat log when I go to the battleships is Machariel after Machariel after Machariel. So I'm very glad that I see this ship being used. It's a very decent alternative to the other PvE ships that are currently out there. Now, of course, every weapon system has its own thing, and every weapon system has its drawback. So I guess it's okay if players have multiple ships that they like to fly. I mean, I have like... Well, I used to have a lot more ships back in the day, that's true. Now I did sell most of them, so I'm left with a couple of ships. And soon I will be finishing up with the Revelation, basically finishing up with the hallmark collection on that ship. I mean, I already have over like 1.2 thousand kills on the Revelation, but the game decided to delete 250 when the Force Auxiliary ships were released, so I basically had to get the kill marks back by shooting down more ships, but it's okay. Not really sure why that happened. It sucked that it happened, but it did, so I just have to blow up more ships. The Revelation would already have over 1,000 stripes, but unfortunately, yeah, the game said nope. you have to grind harder, and well, that's what I'm currently doing. Now, as you can see over here in high sec, the DPS from these ships is nothing serious, so you can go with this build that I currently use. However, if you have an alt account, and if your alt account can use a logistic ship, you can easily swap the build to full DPS, basically no tank at all, just gyro stabilizers, while your alt will maintain your ship's shield. And this is one idea that I want to do. I want to do a video about that, but my alt is still not ready to jump in a logistic ship. So once the skills are ready, I will show you how that's done, and I would probably be clearing every mission in like 2 or 3 minutes. The fact that this ship warps fast means that you will not lose a lot by warping from mission to mission. In high-sec islands, warping speed is very important. The faster you warp, the faster you can clear the mission, and you will be paid a lot more that way, because you are not going to lose time from point A to point B in warping. And this is also one thing that the Machariel is known for, its speed, warp speed. It's a pretty fast ship, and its warp speed is about 4.5 to 6 astronomical units per second, depends on the system. In nullsec it's about 3, in highsec I think it's 6, and that is really fast. This thing is basically a oversized cruiser, and again, I mentioned this probably 1,000 times before, but I like ships that are fast, and Machariel was very attractive for me 3 years ago because of its speed. It was one of the only battleships that I was comfortable with at the time, because at the time I didn't fly a ship that didn't go at least 2.3, 2.5 kilometers per second. I was all about the ship's speed back then, and the warp speed as well was important. Still is important, but nowadays I also got used to fly the big ships, the slow ships, and flying the Machariel feels like flying a cruiser. After all, the Machariel is a oversized cruiser, and I'm very interested to see how the carrier will warp. The carrier will feel like a battleship, I believe. It's gonna be ridiculous to see a carrier warp at cruiser speeds, or battleship speeds I guess, but will be fun to see that thing, how it will perform. I also expect that carrier to be very fast. Based on the numbers that I did see, I should be able to create a carrier that will go 1 kilometer per second, and that is, I would say, a little bit terrifying, because that's a big ship, that's a very big ship, and it can achieve some crazy velocities. And I will show you how to do that. Overall, the new carriers seem to be very interesting. Now, a lot of you also asked me, what am I going to do with the Blood Raider carrier? Am I going to fly one, or am I going to wait for the Chemosh, the faction dreadnought? Well, to be completely and absolutely clear and honest with you, I have no idea what I'll do with those ships. I have a lot of ISK that I'm sitting on, and I kind of want to fly a new ship, and not really sure if I can wait for the faction dreadnoughts to arrive. If they do arrive, well, I'll be sitting on probably 500 billion ISK or something, so buying a faction dreadnought is not going to be a big issue. But at the same time, the skills that I will have to have for the carrier is a lot, and I'm personally not skilled in carriers that much. I have a lot of good skills for dreadnoughts, battleships, cruisers, but not for carriers, so will have to be a big skill investment if I were to go and get the new faction carriers. So not really sure what to do, but I did say that I'll test them out, and I will test them out very soon. Probably will start with the Blood Raider carrier, and then with the Angel carrier, and then probably the other two. They should be pretty interesting ships, and I have so many builds in mind that I want to show you. I also want to show you how to build the new lightweight ships. I think that's a very interesting mechanic that I can't wait to show you. I think most of you will really enjoy the new industry elements that have been added to the game and the new consumption that was added to the game. One of the reasons why I will have skills for industry, I'm also working on that, by the way, because I want to build the new ships that are coming out. I want to build the
Accepted.
tier 2, tier 3 cruisers and things like that. Well, with that being said, that was a very nice run with this monster, this Machariel. Again, one of the oldest ships that I have and one of the most successful ones as well. So with that being said, hope that the builds that you see here are helpful. Hope that I could help you at building your own ship. And with that being said, if you enjoyed it, if you like to support me, like and subscribe. Stay safe, fly safe, and as always, I'll see you next time.